Carl Benjamin, aka Sargon of Akkad, recently did a video where he explains his theory as to why Warhammer 40,000 is as politically salient as ever. Well, I think he's on the right track. I think he overall misses the mark with his theory. We're going to discuss that today. I wrote this up over at phantompulse.com. You can find the link in the description below. So Benjamin begins his video sharing a brief history of Warhammer 40,000 and how it has evolved over its 40-year history, including how chaos evolved from evil aliens from hell into a metaphysical corruption that carried moral weight. He also points out that the setting is static. The Imperium is always about to fall, but never does. Additionally, he says even the grim dark nature of it has becoming something of a pastiche and is decidedly less grim and dark as innovations are allowed to creep into the setting and something approaching hope is actually introduced. He then goes on to provide a brief synopsis of Warhammer 40,000, explaining how it sees the Imperium of Man at perpetual war with a number of other factions, including the Orcs, Necrons, Eldar, Tyranids, and Tau. He then puts heavy emphasis on chaos and how it has four primary gods, Khorne, Nurgle, Slaanesh, and Tzeentch, who he says represent violence, uncleanness, perversion, and subversion. He points out that they wield deconstructive powers and can only take what is and make of it something that it was not. There is no generative strength within them, only degenerative. So he's kind of paraphrasing Tolkien there regarding evil. Evil can not create, right? It can only twist, warp, and manipulate. In contrast to chaos, he says that the Imperium represents various virtues, including order, tradition, duty, self-sacrifice, and honor. He also says it is a generative force that seeks to create something. It establishes rules and boundaries that produce a standard for mankind to uphold. He then goes into a brief overview of how the Imperium of Mankind was organized and run before the Horus Heresy, noting that the Emperor was an atheist that eradicated all religion and sought to eliminate and deny the supernatural. However, his lie, which is that there is no supernatural, was eventually exposed during the Horus Heresy, and the Imperium reorganized itself into worshiping the Emperor as a god. While he notes the Imperium is built around this lie, he claims there is hidden truth in it, that if they did not fight, mankind would be debased or destroyed. He does note that mankind is literally being destroyed by sacrificing thousands or tens of thousands of their own people to feed the emperor as he is supposedly fighting against the various entities in the warp, right? So you want to talk about being debased or destroyed, the emperor is literally doing it himself. Kind of undermines his point here, which we'll get to. Finally, he highlights the franchise's appeal by highlighting its aesthetic as well as a series of questions, saying who doesn't see ranks of Space Marines marching and feel the hairs on the back of their necks go up? Who doesn't want to know that they are upholding a righteous order against the forces of entropy? Who doesn't want to act to preserve something glorious and good in the face of debauchery and destitution? After all this, he gets to his thesis saying, after the years have gone on and the deconstructionist agenda has advanced, there have been fewer and fewer properties for which the heroic straight white man has been able to justly maintain himself. The Space Marines of Warhammer 40,000 have practically been the sole survivor of this, though not necessarily white men, they are necessarily human and necessarily men. In a universe of aliens, being human is metaphorically translated by the progressive as being white, and being men creates something that is exclusive and ensures that the Space Marines have a firm barrier between them and not them. We'll return to this in a little bit. The Space Marines are charged with a moral mission to burn the heretic, kill the mutant, purge the unclean, to keep humanity human. And they don't have to think very deeply about it because the alternative is the total obliteration of everything mankind has and to give ourselves over to the ruinous powers. Not only are the Space Marines in the Imperium completely exclusionary, they are subversive to materialism itself. They invert the tropes of actually there are no gods and actually the hero is not the hero. I'm not sure that's the case, given the fact that he literally already admitted that they are fighting for the Emperor, who is literally killing their people that they are supposedly fighting for. But again, that is his claim. However, he then undermines his entire thesis at the end of his video when he notes how Games Workshop and the employees that work there are working to erode the property. He goes on to point out how the company is embracing various tentacles of woke ideology and even disavowing their own product, beginning with their infamous Warhammer is for everyone post that they made back in June 2020, saying, if you feel the same way, wherever and whoever you are, we're glad you are part of the Warhammer community. If not, you will not be missed. So kind of like the hypocrisy is there in that. Warhammer is for everyone, but if you don't agree with the way we view Warhammer, it's not for you and you won't be missed. So it's not for everyone, right? Anyways, they not only doubled down on that in a blog post titled "The Imperium is Driven by Hate." Warhammer is not in November 2020, but denigrated the Space Marines and the Imperium as well. Writing this, the Imperium of Man stands as a cautionary tale of what could happen should the very worst of humanity's lust for power and extreme, unyielding xenophobia set in. Like so many aspects of Warhammer 40,000, the Imperium of Man is satirical. Just kind of as a point of order on that, I think that might have been the case maybe in general, but I think now it definitely takes itself extraordinarily seriously. I would not describe the Horus Heresy novels as satirical or any of the other various novels that have been written. Those are very serious novels. It takes the universe seriously. It takes the canon seriously. It takes the Legendarium seriously. And I don't think any of the video games that have kind of been made around this are kind of over the top satirical or parody either. I think it's pretty serious now. So I don't think that is actually the case at this point at all anymore. I think it's kind of a hard science fiction tale now, obviously with fantasy elements and things like that too. But it's serious. I don't think that it's satirical really at all anymore. Now maybe there might be standouts or exceptions, but for the most part, I think it definitely is a serious universe, serious story and it takes itself that way. And I think the people who are engaging in it do as well, for the most part. What Benjamin does not include, but also pertinent to his thesis and undermines it, is that the company has hired numerous writers who are also injecting positive depictions of gender ideology and homosexuality into the lore. Remember, he says here that though not necessarily white men, they are necessarily human and necessarily men. In a universe of aliens, being human is metaphorically translated by the progressive as being white, and being men creates something that is exclusive and ensures that the Space Marines have a firm barrier between them and not them. Well, if a bunch of hyper-liberals are controlling the company that can dictate what the Space Marines are and who they are and what they do, there really isn't a barrier because they can inject this stuff into the lore, and they are doing it. And he actually admits that. So it really undermines his whole argument. Nevertheless, while commenting on the blog post where they were saying that the Warhammer 40,000, the Imperium of Men, is satirical, he observed this, saying, with this statement, Games Workshop picked a side, and they chose the side of evil. And so, of course, they themselves joined the chorus of voices agitating for female Space Marines, modifying their own lore, and slightly introducing female characters into this brotherhood. So he is literally contradicting his own thesis right here, where he says that they are a bulwark, they are this barrier. Well, they really aren't if they can be so easily changed by the people that are in charge. So to claim that they are this barrier, that they are this bulwark, is just simply not true. It's just not true. And he admits that it's not true right here in his own video. Nevertheless, he goes on to conclude saying, in this era of hyper-liberalism, in which the dissolution of all barriers, the liberation of all peoples, and the reduction of all things to the mere material is the telos of all political action, the Imperium of Man and its valiant Space Marines stand as a metaphorical fortress against this kind of thinking. Again, this is not true. He literally admits that it's not true because they can so easily change them. And there's people within the company that are already trying to inject female feminism into the Space Marines and make it so they are not just an all-male brotherhood, right? Anyways, he continues saying the Imperium as a faction stands for order, duty, self-sacrifice, and purity. I don't think that's true at all. I think that you have certain characters obviously do indeed show those values and do kind of express those values. But at the end of the day, even he admits that the Emperor feeds off of the human sacrifice of his own people in order to supposedly be fighting the warp, and he has made himself a false god, right? So that is not what the Imperium stands for in the lore. Now, obviously, I think that you do get that in some of the Space Marine stories that are told for sure. But to kind of take some of those Space Marine stories and then blanket generalize it to the entire Imperium, I just don't think that is true at all. And I think that's what really kind of why his argument, one of the reasons why his argument falls apart. Anyways, he continues saying, and because it enforces these values with extreme intolerance, it becomes a heretical example to the current liberal order because they have the opposite in mind for our countries. This is why they have sided with the chaos gods. So unfortunately, Benjamin's entire thesis is a cope. First, even he admits that the property is run by hyper-liberals, and they have already begun eroding the bulwark he claims the Space Marines and the Imperium are. One can only imagine what other types of woke ideology it will be injecting into the property in the near future, especially with its expansion into live action, with its partnership with Prime Video. Again, this stuff has been being added to the Warhammer 40,000 universe. We talked about the positive examples of homosexuality and gender ideology. They obviously retconned the Custodes and noted that there's always been female Custodes. Well, Space Marines are next, right? And he even admits that there are people within the company that are trying to make changes to the Space Marine to make them more woke. And we've seen this before, right? We've seen this with other properties. And he also admits that there are other properties that this has happened to because the people that control them are part of this hyper-liberal agenda. I mean, one need look no further than The Lord of the Rings and recent adaptations in The Rings of Power and The War of the Rohirrim. Feminism is all over those shows. Not to mention the most infamous example in Star Wars. Other examples include the Ghostbusters, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Star Trek, Doctor Who, Terminator. You can look at the DC movies. They all have all of this stuff. So to claim that somehow Warhammer is immune to it based on what its lore is just ridiculous because they can change the lore, and they have changed the lore, and they've done it with all these other properties, and they're doing it in Warhammer 40,000 by his own admission. Additionally, he also admits that while the Space Marines embody these various virtues, they are indeed still fighting for a lie. All of their virtue is being used to sustain a false god who survives by murdering the people he claims to be protecting. This is hardly a bulwark against degeneracy. In fact, it is something Jesus Christ warned against, as recorded in the Gospel of Matthew. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but underneath are ravenous wolves. By their fruits you will know them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Just so, every good tree bears good fruit, and a rotten tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a rotten tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire. So by their fruits you will know them. And this isn't the only time that Christ talked about this. He said this elsewhere in the Gospel of Matthew, saying, false messiahs and false prophets will arise, and they will perform signs and wonders so great as to deceive, if that were possible, even the elect. So the rot is clearly already within the Imperium and is not just manifested as it logically should, right? Given this, Benjamin's Imperium versus Chaos framework falls apart. The Imperium at its heart is just as wicked, if not more so, due to its deception. At least with Chaos, you know they are evil, and they do not have this sheep's clothing, kind of giving this facade of the wickedness that they are engaging in. And you see this in other parts of the lore, right? A lot of the people in the Imperium are destitute, wallowing in just squalor, right? And C.S. Lewis noted this phenomenon in Mere Christianity. He said, the devil always sends errors into the world in pairs of opposites. And he always encourages us to spend a lot of time thinking which is the worse. You see why, of course, he relies on your extra dislike of the one error to draw you gradually into the opposite one. But do not let us be fooled. We have to keep our eyes on the goal and go straight through between both errors. We have no other concern than that with either of them. So I think Benjamin would be better off in taking a page out of St. Basil's book or his address to young men on the right use of Greek literature. In this lecture, St. Basil instructs us Christians, saying, when they recount the words and deeds of good men, you should both love and imitate them, earnestly emulating such conduct. But when they portray base conduct, you must flee from them and stop up your ears. As Odysseus is said to have fled past the song of the sirens, for familiarity with evil writings paves the way for evil deeds. Therefore, the soul must be guarded with great care, lest through our love for letters it receive some contamination unawares, as men drink in poison with honey. Thus, one can praise the Space Marines, the ones that do show these virtues of order, duty, self-sacrifice, and purity. But we can also reject the Imperium and its devotion to a false god that requires murdering its fellow men to sustain him, right? We can say, no, that is ridiculous and that is wrong and that is evil and it should be condemned. But we can also say, hey, this Space Marine here shows off these great virtues that we should emulate. He shows order, duty, self-sacrifice, purity, chastity, etc., right? Fortitude, courage. Similarly, Benjamin can also condemn the woke changes that Games Workshop is injecting into the series and not blanket praise the Imperium as a bulwark when it's clearly not, given how the Emperor lives. So I think that he has missed the mark on this. I will say that if he did take the advice of Saint Basil and kind of look at it from that point, I do think there is an argument to be made that Warhammer 40,000's political salience has increased because it still shows, for the most part, these Space Marines engaging in heroic virtues. Now, I think that is the argument that he should make. I think where he fails is where he tries to apply it to the entire Imperium, because obviously the entire Imperium does not embody these virtues that he says they do. I mean, the whole purpose of the Imperium is to sustain this false god. But in order to do that, you have to murder your own people to do that. So those are not, that's not heroic. That's not a virtue. Those are vices. That is wickedness and evil. So I think when he tries to generalize it to the entire Imperium is where he fails in his analysis here and in his thesis. He should have just kind of focused on the fact that these characters in select stories still show these virtues as positives, and that is, I think, where he would be right on if he took that angle. But he doesn't. He doesn't take that angle. He gets there. He's halfway there. So with all this being said, I do think that you could potentially make his thesis true. I think it is possible to do that, but you'd have to change some of the lore in Warhammer and obviously have to remove the people that are the custodians of it at Games Workshop that are these hyper liberals. So first off, with the lore, you would have to introduce a new, I think, a new faction, right? Or maybe a faction that comes out of the current Space Marines and other Imperial factions when they discover the true horror at the heart of the Imperium, the nature of the Emperor, and they launch not a great crusade, but a holy crusade to excise the evil and chaos at the core of the Imperium. Because again, if you go off of what he's saying with chaos being all of these degenerative forces, well, the Emperor is engaging in that, right? He is engaging in mass murder. That is definitely not generative. That is degenerative. So you have these Space Marines, these factions realize the horror, the evil that is happening here, and they choose what is right and just, and they will fight to purge that evil. It also wouldn't hurt if that Holy Crusade is launched upon the rediscovery of Christianity. We know that in the 40K timeline, Christianity did exist, and the Emperor attempted to stamp it out in his Great Crusade. This Holy Crusade would perpetuate Warhammer 40,000's defining theme of eternal war by redirecting the Imperium's unyielding zeal from external foes to an unending internal purge of its own rotten core. Now, obviously, you would still have them fighting external foes too, so you basically just introduce a new faction. And so, like I said, it provides an opportunity to create a whole new Space Marine faction. You get lots of different things happening. Maybe a whole new faction altogether, but it would obviously be a faction of men, but it would be in contrast to the Imperium, obviously in contrast to Chaos, in contrast to the Tau, as well, and then all the other Xenos factions, the Necrons, etc. And I think that would actually make his thesis come to fruition, because you actually have the entire faction embodying these virtues rather than just certain kind of individuals embodying them. Because remember, even looking at the Horus Heresy, the Space Marines fell to Chaos, right? They became Chaos Space Marines. So even within the lore, the Space Marines are not a bulwark against it when they literally fall and become Chaos Space Marines. So I think his thesis is heavily flawed. And I think it really has a lot to do with the fact that he tried to generalize it and he tried to kind of keep it within the within the lore of 40K. I think the lore of 40K doesn't actually indicate that there is this bulwark that he claims there is. But I think, like I said, if he actually looked at it from St. Basil's perspective and just kind of highlighted the Space Marines and the various stories where the Space Marines show all of these virtues, then his thesis would work. But again, that's not what he did. So that is kind of my take on this. We did get a comment already, and I thought the comment was quite interesting as well. Here from Irish99. He said there is another more useful perspective on this. Warhammer 40K describes what is happening with the Warhammer 40K franchise. Its foes are omnipresent, internal and external, and powerful. They've penetrated the defenses, and from the inside, they work to destroy the Imperium. It is the long march through the institutions, with the left slowly infiltrating Games Workshop and now moving to repurpose it to serve the left as a propaganda vehicle, as they did with Disney, Marvel, DC Comics, and so many others. This will destroy it, a sacrifice they gladly make for the revolution. And I think that you can maybe even elevate this idea, because in the Warhammer 40K lore, right, the Emperor is already in charge. He's already in charge. So they were just waiting to kind of maybe activate this one, kind of like a sleeper cell type thing. But that's kind of my rebuttal against Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad's claim that he made in this recent video here. I think it is lacking, and it could be definitely improved upon. But let me know what you guys make of this. Let me know in the comments below. Remember to always be charitable, especially to each other, and to always speak the truth.
Why would you be afraid of the people? Why are you not afraid of God instead of man?